In hip-hop, no snitching isn't just a slogan, it's supposed to be law. If you talk, you're done. That's the way it's been preached for decades, but in a courtroom, street laws don't mean anything. Judges don't care about codes, prosecutors don't care about loyalty, and sometimes even the loudest voices against snitching end up on the witness stand.
What sorts of things did 9 trade members do?
We participated in a lot of, violent crimes, robberies, assaults, drugs.
Today we're running through 7 real cases where rappers or the people closest to them flipped. Murders, RICO indictments, club shootings, testimony that ended careers, and in the very last case, one of the most famous killings in music history gets cracked open when a man from inside Suge Knight's own circle breaks 27 years of silence to tell prosecutors what he saw the night Tupac was shot. Every story here is backed by paperwork, court transcripts, and receipts you can't just delete. These aren't rumors. These are the moments that turned ride or die into sign right here. Tekashi 6ix9ine. Daniel Hernandez, better known as Tekashi 6ix9ine, didn't just testify against his crew, he practically turned it into a 3-day Broadway production, except the stage was a Manhattan federal courtroom and the ticket price was his freedom. He wasn't born into 9 Trey Gangsta Bloods, he bought in and he made sure everyone knew it. Back in 2017, he linked up with the set to add muscle and credibility to his image, while they got the visibility and money that came with his rapidly growing fame. It was a marriage of convenience that worked until federal agents came crashing in with racketeering, firearms, and conspiracy charges that read like a screenplay for a violent crime drama. The indictment painted 9 Trey as a criminal enterprise with a rap soundtrack, armed robberies, shootings, a plot to kill rapper Chief Keef, and even the kidnapping of Tekashi himself were all tied to the crew. The evidence wasn't some dusty police folder either. The feds had surveillance footage, intercepted text messages, wiretaps, and dashcam videos. Facing 47 years in prison, Tekashi had a choice: ride out the sentence in silence or take the stand and walk out while he was still young enough to dye his hair again. He chose the stand. When he flipped in late 2018, he didn't hold back. On the witness stand in September 2019, Hernandez became the prosecution's centerpiece. Over 3 days, he mapped out 9 Trey's internal structure for the jury like he was giving a TED talk on organized crime. He pointed at old friends and described their roles, explained coded slang, narrated surveillance footage frame by frame, and confirmed details about shootings the prosecution claimed were carried out for clout and retaliation. At one point, prosecutors played dashcam footage of his own kidnapping, and he calmly narrated his abduction, identifying his kidnappers and explaining the threats they made. He tied Anthony Harv Ellison and Algermaya Nuke Mack to crimes ranging from racketeering to drug trafficking, and made sure the jury understood exactly how they fit into the puzzle.
What sorts of things did 9 Trey members do?
We participated in a lot of, violent crimes, robberies, assaults, drugs.
Defense attorneys went on the attack, painting him as an unreliable opportunist willing to say anything to save himself. But the government didn't need him to be a saint. They just needed his words to match the mountain of evidence they already had. And in that sense, Tekashi delivered. The jury convicted Ellison and Mack. In December 2019, the judge handed Tekashi a 24-month sentence, factoring in time served. He walked free in 2020, still breathing, still rapping, and still very much the center of attention, but in a completely different way. His return to music was as loud as his testimony. Gooba smashed YouTube records, he live streamed to millions, and he openly leaned into the Rat label, turning it into part of his brand. Security became a constant expense, shows became impossible without heavy protection, and collaborations with certain artists were off the table entirely. The streets had already passed judgment, and in their book, cooperating with the feds meant his credibility was gone forever, no matter the circumstances. The Tekashi case became a blueprint for federal prosecutors. Here was proof that flipping a high-profile defendant could not only help secure convictions, but also serve as a public deterrent for others who thought they could mix real-life gang activity with mainstream fame without consequences. For Tekashi, the trade-off was simple math: less time in prison in exchange for the rest of his career existing under an unshakable label. Whether you think he was smart for taking the deal or a traitor for breaking the code, one fact is undeniable. In that courtroom, Tekashi gave the government exactly what it wanted, and he walked out with his freedom because of it. Lil Cease. In the mid-90s, Junior Mafia wasn't just a rap group, and it was family, brought together under the wing of the notorious B.I.G. The crew was a mix of neighborhood loyalty and lyrical ambition, bound by the kind of ties people assumed could never be broken. Lil Cease, real name James Lloyd, was more than just another member. He was Lil Kim's right hand, a friend who'd been in her corner since before either of them had platinum plaques. They shared stages, tour buses, and the kind of history that's supposed to survive anything. That illusion didn't make it past the witness stand. The story starts in February 2001, outside Hot 97's New York studios. Lil Kim was there to promote her album, The Notorious Kim, when an argument between her entourage and rival rappers Capone and Noriega turned into a shootout. 20 or so bullets ripped through the street. Miraculously, no one died, but the chaos left multiple people injured and the NYPD with a pile of shell casings and a long list of potential suspects. For years, the case sat mostly as hip-hop gossip, one more violent incident in the long history of New York rap beef. That changed when federal prosecutors got involved. In 2005, Lil Kim was charged with perjury and conspiracy. Prosecutors said she lied to a grand jury about who was with her that day. She denied that members of Junior Mafia were present, but surveillance footage told a different story, and so did one of her oldest friends. Lil Cease was called to the stand, and under oath he confirmed that yes, certain Junior Mafia members Kim claimed not to have seen were in fact right there at the scene. It was a surgical piece of testimony, but it was enough to hammer cracks into her defense. Cease wasn't testifying about some unrelated crime from years before. He was contradicting Kim's sworn statements about a shooting they both knew could get her locked up. He told the jury he was in the limo with her before the shooting, saw who was there, and knew who she was trying to protect. Prosecutors used his account to stitch their case together. The defense tried to downplay it, painting Cease as someone pressured by law enforcement, but the damage was done. In March 2005, Kim was convicted of perjury and conspiracy. She was sentenced to a year and a day in federal prison, serving 10 months. On paper, Cease hadn't snitched in the traditional sense. He didn't give prosecutors new names that got people locked up for fresh crimes. But in hip-hop's unwritten rulebook, what he did qualified. He got on the stand and helped the government prove one of their own was lying. And in the culture, that's all it takes. Kim wasted no time making her feelings public, firing shots in interviews and on tracks, branding him a rat for the world to hear. Cease, for his part, maintained that he was subpoenaed and had no choice but to tell the truth under oath. The fallout was messy and permanent. Junior Mafia's fans knew it was finished. The crew's legacy got split into before and after the trial. In later years, Cease made public attempts at reconciliation, even apologizing for how things went down, but Kim never softened. Interviews about the case became a genre of their own, with both sides holding their ground. For her, it was betrayal. For him, it was survival in a system where refusing to testify can mean contempt charges and jail time of your own. The streets didn't care about legal nuance. Once your name is tied to testimony against a friend, that's your label forever. In barbershops, message boards, and mixtapes, Cease's name came up anytime people talked about snitching in hip-hop. His testimony didn't just send Kim to prison, it rewrote how people remembered one of the most iconic crews in rap history. Instead of being a symbol of loyalty and Biggie's enduring influence, Junior Mafia became an example of how fast loyalty can evaporate when the court clerk starts the recorder. Years later, Kim would still bring it up in interviews, her tone never softening. Cease would still defend himself, pointing to the subpoena as proof he had no choice. But in hip-hop, the court of public opinion doesn't operate on subpoena, it operates on perception. And the perception was that one of Biggie's closest proteges took the stand against another, breaking a bond fans thought was unbreakable. T.I. and Alpha Mega. By the late 2000s, T.I. had cemented himself as Atlanta rap royalty. Grand Hustle Records was his empire, and part of that empire's muscle came from Cedric Zellers, better known as Alpha Mega. If T.I. was the polished chart topper, Alpha Mega was the street certified enforcer, a towering figure with a reputation that gave Grand Hustle some of its edge. He appeared in videos, on stage, and in the kind of behind the scenes stories that made him sound like the guy you'd call when you needed a problem handled. For a while, the image worked. Then 2009 happened and the image shattered in public. It started when a reporter from Ozone magazine dug into old federal court records and found something no one in Grand Hustle's camp was prepared for. In the mid-1990s, long before his rap career, Alpha Mega had been convicted on federal heroin trafficking charges. That part wasn't new. What was new and explosive was that buried in the paperwork was his cooperation with the DEA. Specifically, he had testified in a federal trial against another man, a high-level heroin trafficker, in exchange for a reduced reduced sentence. His testimony helped secure the conviction. It wasn't speculation or street rumor. The court transcripts were there, with his words under oath in black and white. In the rap world, rat accusations get thrown around loosely, but this was the kind of discovery that didn't need hashtags or memes to spread. The paperwork did the talking, the revelation landed like a bomb. Within days, blogs, forums, and hip-hop radio were roasting Alpha Mega's name, dissecting the transcripts line by line. Questions flew about whether Grand Hustle knew, and how someone with that kind of past could have been standing next to one of rap's most respected figures. T.I. didn't wait long to respond. In May 2009, he went on Atlanta's Hot 107.9 and announced that Alpha Mega was officially out of Grand Hustle. He didn't mince words. He said he was shocked. He didn't condone that kind of cooperation. And as far as he was concerned, Alpha Mega was no longer part of the family. Coming from T.I., who had his own complicated history with federal charges and plea deals, it was a clear message. Whatever you think about me, I'm not standing next to someone with a confirmed informant record. Alpha Mega fired back in interviews saying the situation was being twisted. He claimed he only cooperated because the man he testified against had physically assaulted him, and that his motivation wasn't to take down an associate but to protect himself. He also pointed out that this had happened more than a decade before his rap career, framing it as part of a past life he'd moved on from. But in the court of public opinion, none of that mattered. The story was too clean, too damning, the kind of scandal that doesn't get untangled once it's in circulation. The fallout was instant and brutal. Alpha Mega's career in music effectively ended overnight. His reputation in Atlanta's street circles took an even bigger hit. Being labeled a snitch is hard enough to shake when it's just rumor. When it's tied to court transcripts anyone can pull up online, it's permanent. The optics were especially damaging because of his role in Grand Hustle. He wasn't just another artist, he was seen as a protector, a figure whose credibility came from the very street code he was now accused of breaking. In the years that followed, Alpha Mega would occasionally resurface in interviews, trying to tell his side of the story, but the damage was done. In hip-hop, especially in the South, the paperwork party is a ritual. People dig up federal documents to prove someone's past cooperation. Once those papers circulate, they don't go away. For Alpha Mega, the entire narrative of his career shifted from being T.I.'s muscle to being the guy who testified in a federal drug case. What made it sting even more for fans was the way it fractured Grand Hustle's image. T.I. had built the label as a powerhouse that blended street authenticity with mainstream success. Losing someone like Alpha Mega under those circumstances didn't just raise questions about him, it raised questions about the whole camp's ability to manage its public image. For people on the outside, it was a reminder that the no snitching code doesn't just live in the music, it's a litmus test that can end careers the moment the wrong set of documents hit the internet. Troy Ave. On May 25, 2016, the New York rap scene collided with a nightmare inside Manhattan's Irving Plaza. T.I. was headlining a show, the venue was packed, and backstage, egos were sharing the same oxygen. Among them, Troy Avenue, a Brooklyn rapper with a growing buzz, and Daryl Campbell, better known as Taxstone, a podcaster whose street connections and outspoken style had made him both popular and polarizing. The two had a history then and it wasn't friendly. They traded shots on social media, with Taxstone questioning Troy's street credibility and Troy firing back in interviews. That tension was already loaded when they found themselves in the same cramped green room that night. What happened next is still replayed in grainy security footage. The two allegedly crossed paths, words turned to shoves, and then came the sound that changes everything. Gunfire. Chaos ripped through the space. People screamed and ducked. By the time the smoke cleared, Troy Ave's bodyguard and longtime friend Ronald Banga McFadder was dead. Troy himself had been shot in the leg, and in the panic, he was caught on surveillance charging through the crowd, gun in hand, firing towards someone off frame. That image hit the internet fast, cementing a public narrative before the legal one even had a chance to form. The NYPD wasted no time. Within days, Troy Avenue was arrested and charged with attempted murder and weapons possession. But the case was messy. Ballistics pointed to a gun prosecutors claimed Taxstone had brought into the venue. Witness accounts contradicted each other. The security footage showed Troy firing, but not necessarily starting the shootout. It was the kind of high-profile case that could drag for years, and it did. In January 2017, Taxstone was arrested on federal weapons charges tied to the shooting, with prosecutors alleging he was the one who fired the fatal shot that killed Banga. Still, the burden of proof was heavy. Enter 2023, and Troy Avenue took the stand. For 3 days, he testified that Taxstone had pulled a gun on him in the green room, that a struggle ensued, and that he only grabbed the weapon to defend himself and fire back. He described the moment Banga went down, the chaos of trying to get out alive, and the split-second decisions that turned the night into a fatal tragedy. Troy's testimony was the final piece prosecutors needed. In March 2023, Taxton was convicted of manslaughter, assault, and criminal possession of a weapon. The judge sentenced him to 35 years in prison. For the courtroom, it was justice served. For the rap world, it was another test of the no snitching code. Troy didn't just testify, he doubled down afterward. Outside of court, he mocked critics in interviews and dropped music where he openly embraced being the guy who told the jury exactly what happened. His logic was simple. He wasn't going down for something he didn't start, and he wasn't protecting someone he saw as an enemy who'd killed his friend. Reactions were split. Some fans, and even a few fellow rappers said Troy was right to defend himself and speak out. Others stamped him with the permanent witness label, arguing that once you take the stand in a murder case, you can't claim the same street credibility you once had. In hip-hop, it doesn't matter if you were best friends or bitter rivals. The act of testifying against someone in a criminal trial is enough to get you exiled from certain circles. Troy didn't seem to care. He leaned into the controversy, turning court dates into part of his public persona. His music videos referenced the shooting, and his lyrics carried not so subtle jabs at anyone questioning his choices. Taxstone's supporters, meanwhile, blasted him online, framing the case as proof that the legal system will always side with the person willing to cooperate, regardless of the nuances. The Irving Plaza shooting became more than just a tragic night in New York rap history. It became a litmus test for how far the no snitching code can bend before it breaks. For Troy Avenue, the trial was about clearing his name and putting the blame where he believed it belonged. For the culture, it was another reminder that the lines between survival, justice, and betrayal aren't just thin, they're almost invisible once the courtroom doors close. Slime Life Shoddy. When the Fulton County District Attorney announced the sprawling YSL RICO indictment in May 2022, it was the kind of case built to make headlines. Dozens of defendants, 56 counts, and a theory that YSL, known publicly as Young Stoner Life, the label fronted by Young Thug, was actually a hybrid criminal street gang. The government alleged years of violent acts, drug deals, and armed robberies, with lyrics and social media posts presented as evidence. It was a legal storm big enough to swallow entire careers, and for one of its members, Wunny Lee, better known as Slime Life Shoddy, the storm came fast. Slime Life was one of the rising names in Atlanta's new wave, with features from Lil Durk and a steady street buzz. When he was indicted alongside Thug, Gunna, and others, fans assumed he'd either fight the charges or sit in jail until trial. But in December 2022, he surprised everyone. He took a plea deal. It wasn't just any plea. It was a negotiated agreement that included probation instead of prison time, and a key clause stating that if called, he would testify truthfully. In court, he answered yes to a series of questions from the judge about YSL's existence as a gang, his association with it, and the understanding that he could be called to testify in the future. The internet didn't take long to react. Clips from the courtroom spread in hours, with fans and bloggers accusing him of being the latest in a line of YSL affiliates flipping to save themselves. Slime Life defended himself online, saying he hadn't told on anyone and that his plea only applied to his own case. But the paperwork told a more complicated story. A deal like that doesn't guarantee you'll testify, but if the prosecution calls you, refusing can land you back in jail on contempt charges. Fast forward to 2024, and that's exactly what happened. The trial for the remaining YSL defendants was underway, and Slime Life was called as a witness. On the stand, he acknowledged that when he joined YSL, he treated it like a gang. He explained a social media post that prosecutors argued was connected to a specific criminal act, even reading the caption aloud in court. That moment was so disruptive, the defense moved for a mistrial, claiming the jury had been tainted. The judge denied the motion, and the trial rolled on. In the prosecution's narrative, Slime Life's words were gold. They took rap branding, slime, hand signs, group photos, and turned it into admissions of a criminal hierarchy. His testimony wasn't the smoking gun, but it helped fill in the picture for jurors, connecting the dots between imagery and action. For the defense, it was a nightmare. A former co-defendant turned partial insider, confirming just enough to make the state's job easier. The public reaction was as predictable as it was divided. Some saw it as inevitable. When you face decades in prison and the state offers you a way out, most people take it. Others saw it as a betrayal of the family image YSL had pushed for years. And for fans who believed the music was just music, it was another uncomfortable reminder that sometimes the art is only half fiction. Slime Life's career after the plea took a hit. While he still released music, some collaborators kept their distance. The Snitch label stuck in certain circles, amplified by memes, blogs, and YouTube channels dissecting his court appearance. In interviews, he maintained that he didn't incriminate anyone, insisting he only spoke on his own actions. But in the code of the streets, the difference between telling your story and telling someone else's is irrelevant if the end result helps the prosecution. The YSL case as a whole has become a modern rap cautionary tale, how mixing music, brand identity, and alleged criminal activity can create a perfect storm for law enforcement. And Slime Life Shoddy's role in it is a reminder of how quickly ride or die can turn into I'll take the plea. Whether you see him as smart for avoiding a long prison bid or as disloyal for stepping into the witness box, one thing is clear. In a trial this big, even a few lines of testimony can echo louder than an entire album. Gunna's Alford plea. When the YSL RICO case exploded into the news in 2022, Sergio Gunna Kitchens was one of its most high-profile defendants. Alongside Young Thug and over 24 others, he was accused of being part of a criminal street gang operating under the guise of a rap label. The charges tied YSL to murders, shootings, armed robberies, and drug trafficking. For months, Gunna sat in jail without bond, maintaining his innocence while prosecutors pushed a narrative that blurred the line between his music and the alleged crimes. By the end of the year, that narrative took a turn no one saw coming. In December 2022, Gunna walked into a Fulton County courtroom and entered an Alford plea, a rare legal move that let him maintain his innocence while admitting the prosecution had enough evidence to convict him. It was a strategic way of saying, I didn't do it, but I'm not risking losing at trial. The plea reduced his charge to a single count of racketeering conspiracy, gave him time served, and set him free with conditions including 500 hours of community service. But the moment that mattered most for his reputation came in the standard plea colloquy, when the judge asked a series of yes or no questions to confirm the deal. The video went viral in hours. Gunna answered yes ma'am when asked if YSL was a gang and if he knew members who had committed crimes in furtherance of the gang. To lawyers it was routine, a tightly scripted exchange every plea requires. To the streets it was something else entirely, a public admission that the prosecution's gang narrative was true, and worse, it was an admission they could use against Young Thug and others still fighting the case. Almost immediately, social media lit up with accusations of snitching. Memes plastered his face next to rats, lyrics from his own songs were thrown back at him, and YouTube lawyers spent hours breaking down what his answers could mean in the bigger trial. Gunna tried to get ahead of it, issuing a statement the same day saying he had not cooperated, had not testified, and would not testify against anyone. He framed the plea as the only way to regain his freedom without betraying his morals. But optics are everything, and in the world of hip-hop, optics often count more than facts. The legal reality is more complicated. An Alford plea is not the same as a cooperation agreement. Gunna didn't have to take the stand, and to this day he hasn't, but prosecutors can still use his plea in subtle ways, quoting his in-court answers, referencing the agreed upon facts, or even calling him to testify later if they think it's worth the risk of him refusing. In a multi-defendant RICO case, every plea is a building block for the state's case against the remaining defendants. Whether Gunna liked it or not, his deal became part of the prosecution's arsenal. Fans split down the middle. Some argued that doing years in jail for loyalty to a crew you can't prove is innocent is foolish, that his first duty was to himself and his family. Others pointed to the no snitching code, where even indirect help to the prosecution is considered betrayal. That split wasn't just in the streets, it was visible in the industry too. Collaborations dried up, certain rappers unfollowed him, while others quietly reached out in support. When Gunna finally returned to music in 2023, he addressed the controversy head on in his lyrics, insisting he hadn't told on anyone and didn't owe explanations to people who didn't know the full story. The music still charted, proving that while part of his audience had turned, another part didn't care about the case as long as the songs hit. But the snitch label stuck in the corners of the culture that still treats street codes as gospel. The YSL case is far from over and Young Thug's trial is still ongoing. Until the dust settles, Gunna's plea will hang over the entire situation like a cloud. Even if he never takes the stand, the sight of him in court, nodding to the judge's questions about YSL, will live forever online. For some it's proof he broke the code, for others it's proof the code is unrealistic when your freedom's on the line. For Gunna, it's the deal that got him home, and the moment that reshaped his career more than any song he's ever released. Suge Knight's bodyguard. For nearly 3 decades, the murder of Tupac Shakur sat in the hazy space between open wound and urban legend. The night of September 7, 1996, in Las Vegas has been dissected in documentaries, debated in barbershops, and mythologized in hip-hop forever. Tupac was riding shotgun in a black BMW, Suge Knight behind the wheel. They just left a Mike Tyson fight, got into a scuffle in the MGM Grand Lobby with Orlando Anderson, a known Southside Crip, and were headed to Club 662. At a stoplight, a white Cadillac pulled up, shots tore through the passenger side, and Tupac was hit 4 times. 6 days later, he was gone. The case never saw a conviction, and silence from the people who were there only made it murkier. For years, anyone tied to that night either stuck to the script or said nothing at all. The streets had their version. This was gang retaliation, sealed in blood, with nobody willing to risk their life by talking. Then in 2023, everything shifted when Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, like a former Compton Crip, was arrested and charged with orchestrating Tupac's murder. That was already big news, but in the months leading up to the trial, something even more explosive came out. A man who had worked as a bodyguard in Suge Knight's inner circle agreed to testify for the prosecution. He wasn't some distant observer. He was in the convoy that night, close enough to hear the gunshots and see the chaos unfold in real time. In court, under oath, the bodyguard gave an account that directly challenged pieces of the long-accepted story. He described the movements of Suge's entourage before and after the shooting in ways that prosecutors said helped prove there was foreknowledge of the attack. According to his testimony, Suge's behavior in the moments leading up to the shooting wasn't the pure shock it had always been portrayed as. He claimed there were exchanges between cars in the convoy that suggested they knew trouble was coming. He detailed who was in which vehicle, where they positioned themselves, and what was said in the scramble after the shots rang out. It wasn't just filler, these were details investigators had been chasing for decades. The impact in the courtroom was immediate. Jurors leaned in, prosecutors tied his account to other pieces of evidence, like Keefe D's own past interviews admitting his role in the setup, and ballistics reports that matched the trajectory of the shots to the passenger side where Tupac sat. The defense tried to tear into the bodyguard's credibility, painting him as a man with motives, there may be money, maybe revenge, and reminding the court that his story had never been told publicly until now. But the fact that someone from inside Suge Knight's protective bubble was breaking the decades-long silence was enough to change the temperature in the room. Outside the courtroom, the reaction was electric. For fans who'd lived with the mystery for most of their lives, this wasn't just new information, it was betrayal on a historic scale. Suge Knight had built a reputation as a man surrounded by loyal soldiers who would take anything they knew to the grave. This testimony proved at least one of them wouldn't. For conspiracy theorists, it was fuel to reframe the entire night. For others, it was closure, a voice from inside the car chain finally filling in blanks that had haunted the culture. The move also carried serious risks. Anyone tied to that night knew the danger of speaking publicly, let alone testifying in court against someone connected to both street politics and one of the most infamous unsolved murders in American history. That's part of what made the flip so shocking. It wasn't just about the legal weight of the words, it was about breaking an unspoken contract that had held for nearly 30 years. Keefe D's case is still unfolding, and whether this testimony will be the nail in the coffin or just another controversial chapter is yet to be seen. But its place in rap history is already set. Tupac's murder has always been wrapped in silence, protected by fear, loyalty, and myth. Now, one of the men who was there has turned that silence into sworn words for the state. It's the kind of moment that reminds everyone, from rappers to bodyguards to fans, that no matter how sacred the code feels in the streets, in a courtroom, it's just another rule waiting to be broken. 7 cases, 7 different ways the silence broke. Some did it to cut decades off their sentence, some did it to avoid a perjury charge, some did it because the prosecutors already had them cornered, and one did it almost 30 years after the fact, changing the story of one of rap's most infamous murders. In the end, the streets and the courtroom speak different languages. The courtroom speaks in convictions, the streets speak in loyalty. Once you talk to one, you've lost the other, and no amount of records, tours, or apologies will ever change that. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, hit the like button, click on the cards displayed on your screen to see more awesome videos, and don't miss out on the next releases. See ya.